Hello and welcome to this exclusive series on Future Fit Publishing, organized by AdTech and YuktaMedia. I'm Shiney and I handle content for AdTech in India. In our first episode today, we discuss the role of technology in the publishing business and how it is revolutionizing both the newsroom and the business floor today. As 2020 heralded big changes for the digital world, the publishing business was not behind. Through the acceleration of its digital transformation, digital publishing channels and its associated technologies such as content personalization, audience management, revenue management, and its effective usage has actually catapulted select publishers into a different league. This web series is our attempt to uncover some of these technologies, strategies, and innovations that have worked for the publishing business globally. A big shout out to YuktaMedia for partnering with us on this initiative. Yukta's mission is to lead publishers on a digital transformation journey to build a long-term engaging relationship with their audiences. Using the Yukta One Media ERP, publishers identify their most valuable digital assets and audiences at scale by automating data management, ad operations, revenue operations, and the billing reconciliation process. Today, we have with us a fabulous lineup of speakers for you to share insights based on their extensive experience working with these emerging technologies in the publishing space. We have Jeremy Gilbert, who is the Knight Professor in Digital Media Strategy at the Northwestern University. Both his work and teaching focus on content and revenue strategies of existing and emerging media companies. He explores the intersection of technology and media, examining how new tools and techniques will affect the creation, consumption, and distribution of media. Prior to assuming the Knight Chair, Mr. Gilbert was the Washington Post Director of Strategic Initiatives, where he led an award-winning team that transformed the Post into an international digital-first news organization. Welcome, Jeremy. Great to have you on Future Fit Publishing.
Thank you so much for having me.
Next up, we have Professor Nalin Mehta, who's the Dean of School of Modern Media and Advisor Global University Systems. Professor Mehta is an award-winning social scientist, journalist, and author who has held senior leadership positions in major Indian digital, print, and TV news companies. He's a communications expert with international financing institutions and the UN in Switzerland, Geneva. He's a renowned author and has held research positions at universities and institutions in Australia, Singapore, Switzerland, and India. Most recently, Mr. Mehta has been executive editor, Times of India Online, consulting editor for Times of India, and managing director, India Today for the English TV news channel. Welcome, Professor Nalin. Great to have you on Future Fit Publishing.
Thanks very much, Shiny. Great to be here.
Awesome. Our next speaker is Sanjay Sindhwani, who is the CEO at the Indian Express Online Media Services. Sanjay has over 25 years in the media industry, primarily across digital, with earlier stints in print and television. At the Indian Express, Sanjay has been responsible for a strong turnaround of the company in the current financial year, in spite of the COVID and lockdowns, hitting the media industry severely. He was also involved in the acquisition of MyInsuranceClub.com, which is an insurance aggregator, and the launch of subscriptions for the Indian Express. Prior to joining Indian Express, Sanjay has worked with Times Internet, Television 18, and Bennett Coleman. Welcome, Sanjay. Great to have you here.
Thanks, Shiny. Pleasure to be on this panel.
And joining Sanjay, Jeremy, and Nalin, we have Hemant Jain, who's the Senior Executive Vice President and Head of Digital Business at Lokmat. Hemant has been associated with Lokmat Media since 2016. He spearheads the digital transformation and setting up of newer businesses for the group in the online news, entertainment, original content, and branded solutions space. In a very short period of time, he has been instrumental in building and scaling the digital footprint for the group and making it a leading local language player in the digital news and entertainment space. Hi, Hemant. Welcome. Welcome to this series. Great to have you here.
Thanks, Shiney. Pleasure to be a part of this panel today.
And exploring the role of emerging media in the evolving marketing and media landscape with these amazing speakers is Chanpreet Arora, co-founder Resilient Digital Services. She's the former CEO of Vice Media and a Reuters Fellow from the Oxford University. Chanpreet is a recognized leader in the Indian media industry. Her work with her work over the last 19 years has included launch and scaling of leading international and local media brands in India, which includes the Vice Media, the New York Times, Formula One, Times Internet, and Discovery Channel. Earlier in 2018, as CEO, she led the launch of Vice Media in India. She has recently co-founded Resilient Digital Services, which is building a SaaS marketplace for publishers to enable monetization across content, media, data, and programming channels. Some of her clients include the New York Times, Parent Tune, and McKinsey and Company. Welcome, Chanpreet. Great to have you at AdTech.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Really looking forward to the conversation.
Awesome. So, but before I hand over the floor to you, Chanpreet, let me ask you this quick question, and something that I've been thinking about. Why now? Why is it becoming so increasingly important to have this conversation about emerging technologies in the publishing space? What really changed?
Thanks. That's a really good question. The media industry was, let's just dial back a bit, right? The media industry was among the first to encounter and successfully navigate the spate of digital disruptions. However, the growing pains are far from over. The digital transformation is a continuously evolving beast, and enterprises have to tame it over and over again. Let's just take the context of 2020, right? We saw digital consumption skyrocketing at unprecedented pace. Many publishers have said that they've achieved 3 years of growth or 5 years of growth, depending on which segment you look at, right? However, business models are still evolving, and that's where really we start to explore what other options and technology-led solutions can we offer. On one hand, editorial teams are struggling to keep up with the demands of multi-platform content creation and distribution, while on the other hand, increase in digital ad revenues is not even close to make up for the loss of television and print subscription and ad revenues. And the problem is more acute in India, as print, if you recall, was still a stable and growing business in 2019. And how does that sound today? So globally, if we look at what's been happening, and Jeremy will shed more light on it, but globally, if you look at the leading digital players who were ready with their business models, their ecosystems have really benefited. Let's take the New York Times for instance. They added over 2 million paid subscribers in a year or 15 months. So the way the parable goes, it took them 100 years to get the first million subscribers and 10 years to get the 6.5 million. Today they're at 7.7 million paid subscribers, more than any other paid daily in the world, right? And now what's starting to happen is that the ad tech innovation is becoming more democratized, right? And all of us would resonate with that. The innovations in content creation, distribution, monetization, subscription space, as well as ad are happening. However, the adoption and optimization of these technologies and reskilling of the workforce at an organization level, especially in APAC, I'm just going to talk about some of the challenges which we're going to touch upon in the debate today. It's digital transformation of traditional giants into nimble digital players, and we're really looking forward to Sanjay and Hemant shedding more light on it. Investment in product and user experience technologies, right? Build versus buy debate, content management, designing the ad tech stack and building a strong programmatic monetization system with partners or in-house. And the most important, the elephant in the room, developing a subscriber first model. Is it possible for India? Let's see how much of it we can address. I hope this answers a part of the question that you posed, Shiney, and I'm Really looking forward to the debate, right?
Absolutely.
Great. So now, if I may, moving ahead, we're going to kick off the first part of our session, focusing on AI and enterprise tech in the newsroom with Jeremy and Nalin. It's really rare that you have two people who have led successful transformations for leading brands in different parts of the world, literally, uh, in their countries, and both decided to come back to academia. I'm definitely going to touch upon this as to why you're back. But I'd like to start the session by inviting Jeremy to give the keynote address and share with us today's experience of leading the transformation of the Post into an international digital first news organization. Over to you, Jeremy.
Thank you, Chanpreet. I am, as I said, really excited to be here and excited to talk a little bit about the evolution of the Post, that the digital transformation over the last 8 years at the Post has been pretty dramatic. And it's a story that many of you know well, but I want to divide it into 3 eras and to talk about the technology and the monetization of each of those 3 eras. That Jeff Bezos bought the Post in late October 2013. And the first era of the Post transformation was very much about scale. The Post as a digital news organization was reaching only about 20 million unique visitors per month across the world. And I say only because if you compare that to competitors like the New York Times, it was less than half as large. And so the initial phase in the transformation of the Washington Post was very much about how does the Post achieve digital scale? And digital scale in 2014 through early 2016 was very much about Facebook. So it was very much about transforming the newsroom in a way to tell the kinds of stories that would resonate on Facebook. A woman crashing her own funeral is a great example of the kind of socially driven, audience-rich stories that you can tell. And what that led to was a dramatic transformation in the size of the audience coming to the Post. But what that meant from a monetization standpoint was just that the Post could show more ads, because effectively, until early 2016, there were virtually no subscription options for digital audiences and no reason to subscribe. Coming from Facebook, you could see as many as 20 stories in a given month without ever hitting a paywall. And so the technology and the newsroom staff at the Washington Post was very much geared to how do we reach as many people as possible and show them as many ad impressions as possible. The second phase in the era of the transformation of the Post was very much about scale plus subscriptions. And so this really started at the end of 2016, but it was mostly 2017, 2018. And the kind of journalism that resonates were the absolutely unique moments. So one unique moment was the Access Hollywood tape. The Washington Post was the first to get access to that tape, the first to publish that tape. And the audience really rewarded the Post's focus on investigative work, on holding government figures accountable. And what that led to was a dramatic growth in digital subscriptions. So in 2013, there were fewer than 50,000 digital subscribers when Bezos bought the Post. By September of 2017, there were 1 million digital subscribers, and today there are more than 3 million digital subscribers to the Post. While it's not scaled as quickly as maybe the New York Times, it has been a tremendous evolution, and it has forced the newsroom to think about both new technologies, but a new approach. Instead of saying, how can we find a story that resonates on social platforms, that drives enormous amount of sideways traffic to the Post, instead the focus is on how can we have a deeper relationship with our audience, and how can we get members of our audience to come directly to the Washington Post? What's the kind of unique journalism that will drive people to come directly? And so today, the Post is very much about subscriptions plus scale. So you see the reversal there. It's not about driving a bigger audience, even though during the pandemic, the Post has experienced the largest audiences in its history, that they have had months of over 150 million unique digital viewers just in the United States alone. But that scale is not important without subscriptions and without subscribers. And the kinds of journalism and the kinds of technology that drive that relationship that is subscriber first, but also at scale, is very different. And so what you see are stories like this, where the Post was the first to define, at least in the United States, what it meant to flatten the curve. And when they explained flattening the curve, they explained flattening the curve in a way that was visual, and that showed rather than told the story. And that telling the story back in March of 2019, not only were they the first to do it, but they were the first to do it in a variety of different ways. This is the first time a single story from the Washington Post had ever been translated into more than 15 different languages, and that the international audience for the story was much bigger than even the US domestic audience. And that a story like this, because it was both urgent and important, it was compelling in a way that that other journalism on this topic had not been. It really drove subscribers, both domestically and internationally. And so what you start to see now is this latest era of the Post, where it's not just about driving subscriptions, it's not just about driving scale, but it's about driving SaaS-based technology, so software as a service. And the two prime examples for the Washington Post are the rise of Arc and the rise of Zeus. And we'll talk a little bit more about both of these, but the Arc technology is a suite of publishing tools that allow publishers like the Washington Post, but also about 600 other newsrooms around the world, to tell stories in really unique and different ways, but also to add very important and explicit data intelligence about audiences that can lead to more subscriptions and higher retention rates and lower churn. And then Zeus, a technology that helped dramatically improve viewability. So why was viewability so important for the Washington Post? Well, one reason that viewability is important is because it allows you to get more out of the existing ad units you have, to load those ads more quickly, but also potentially to have fewer, less intrusive ads and to have them monetize at a much higher rate, which allows for a better subscriber experience. So you can see that the ad experience and the subscriber experience go hand in hand. If you can have ads that load more quickly, that have higher viewability, then you can do more to improve the subscription experience while still showing ads. And so when we talk about what the print era at the Washington Post looked like, it was very much a combination of these three key areas of monetization: single copy sales for print, subscriptions, primarily for print, and advertising. And that advertising came in several forms. You had native style content, either inserts or content within regular advertising units and display advertising. And so what does this look like in a digital era? Well, it's changed a little bit. Advertising remains a really critical pillar. It's still very much about native content and display advertising. Subscriptions have moved almost exclusively to digital, that the Post still depends on revenue from print advertising, print subscribers, but fewer and fewer of them. And there are more and more digital subscribers. But then also the licensing of content is incredibly important, but so are these other new areas, including partnerships, events, the SaaS model that I talked about, and a growing potential for micropayments. And so what does this look like? Well, when we talk about partnerships and events, it is about creating new content areas that resonate with an audience, with subscribers, but also a partner. And so the Climate Solutions launch about 2.5 years ago was launched in partnership with Rolex. That Rolex very explicitly said, we don't just want to advertise, we want to help support the kind of journalism you want to do, you're already doing, but we want to do more of it. And so the Rolex partnership actually allowed the Post to hire 4 full-time editors and reporters just to look at the question of climate change from a solutions-oriented standpoint. And there are a series of events using journalism that was produced by this team as the cornerstone. So that's one example of what a new revenue model can look like in a digital era. A second one is AT&T's partnership with the Washington Post. AT&T provides the Washington Post with unique 5G-oriented technologies. And so in the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic, when the Washington Post was forced to leave its newsroom, AT&T's 5G technology allowed for live video shows from journalists' homes to cover the pandemic, something that never would have been possible if they were just connecting over regular cellular connections or over their home internet. And then finally, the Post is looking at what new forms of technology are making possible. And so, for example, if you look at the history of audio, there wasn't a place for an organization like Washington Post. But today, with smart speakers and the newest kinds of podcasts, there are unique ways to blend different technologies the Post is already looking at. So the Post has been in the podcast space for about 8 years, very aggressively for the last 3. But the Post has also been creating machine-generated content. And what they were able to do for this latest 2020 US election is to combine those two technologies. So the big idea is one of the politics podcasts from the Washington Post. And what the Post was able to do is to geolocate the audience for both new and long tail archival podcasts, and then use machine generated content, meaning AI powered systems, to cover local elections in those specific areas for those specific users. Because the US election took much longer than usual, over the course of the week, every 10 or 15 minutes, the Post would update what those local election coverage looked like. And so that when a user was calling up either a new or archival podcast, they heard election results, very recent ones, from their area specifically. So it meant that there were tens of thousands of different for specific users in specific locations, none of which would have been possible without this kind of technology. So in closing, what I want to emphasize is the role that technology plays for the Post is both in the creation of new forms of journalism and coverage, but also new ways to monetize that coverage and a much closer and deeper relationship between the technology, the journalism, and the audience.
Wow, thank you so much, Jeremy. This has been so insightful, and I'm sure a lot of publishers in India are actually going through similar challenges of managing the transition, and there's a lot to take home from this. Uh, I'd like to now move on to bringing in Nalin in the conversation, and something that connects both of you on this front is that one of the big projects that Nalin led was related to political reporting and how AI and big data changed the way Times of India started looking at election reporting in a very similar way. So, Nalin, welcome back to the screen. Can you walk us through your journey as Executive Director of Times of India Digital about the strategic projects that editorial products, including visual storytelling across Times of India's digital platforms in 11 languages? It would be sorry, I was just saying it would be helpful if you can touch upon the internal challenges and the impact this project created for the editorial team and the organization at large in terms of quality of reporting, reach, and engagement.
Right. Thanks very much, Chanpreet and Jeremy. Thanks for a very engaging presentation and for taking us through the Washington Post journey. So at the TOI, when I started my role at the TOI in 2017, towards the end of 2017, our challenge was slightly different from the challenge of Washington Post in terms of the fact that the TOI is a print behemoth in India, the largest selling daily in the world in print terms, but also in online terms, it had a long legacy of being the predominant player in digital news in any case. So we had the scale, albeit without paywalls or subscriptions and so on, because that was not the model we were following at that point of time. And we were not, fortunately, at that point as dependent on Facebook or Google SEO for our audiences. So while we were already the biggest player in the digital online, it became pretty clear to us when we were thinking about things like engagement, viewer engagement, eventually a subscription-based model, a more prime offering as the digital landscape changed. It became pretty clear to us that what the editorial offerings that we had across the platform, across languages, and across the different print publications of the group as well, a lot of it was still being driven by a print mindset. So in a sense that that there was a great deal of optimization that we could do to explore the wonderful opportunities that big data analytics, interactive storytelling could afford to us, which needed an entire mindset shift at the level of news gathering and in the newsroom. So to put it bluntly, a lot of digital was understood by a lot of people as essentially copy pasting what you did in print or in television and putting it on digital, and that was online. So we wanted to change that substantially, and we did 3 major interventions. The first was, as Chanpreet outlined or mentioned, in the domain of elections and political coverage. The second was in the domain of business reporting, financial reporting, and the annual budget, the union budget by the government of India. And the third was in the domain of automation. So I'll just take you through all 3 of these very quickly. And if I can, so political coverage we hit upon as a primary focus area for us. India is a highly politicized country, the world's largest democracy, and we were leading up to Narendra Modi's second election in 2019. So we started experimenting with that, and the first step was to build a large big data hub, where we essentially, let me just share the screen with you to give you a sense of what we did. We put together a large data hub looking at electoral data over the last 40 years, not just at the constituency level in India, but at the sub-constituency level down to the voting booth level. We put that together, cleaned up the data, and then we put together more than 100 other data sets on looking at different socio-economic parameters of Indian society, and we made these data sets talk to each other. And the idea was to make almost like an X-ray view of Indian politics and society, and then use that as the basis for driving our editorial coverage across the group, across platforms, and creating products, both direct products out of it for television, for print and digital, but also to inform our coverage in a much more significant manner. So I'll just give you an example of this. So for example, this was the culmination, and this started from 2017 December with the Gujarat election, and we tested it across 6 assembly elections leading up to the 2019 election. So and we didn't just look at what the data was in the public domain. So I'll give you an example. When we had the data sets with us, we interrogated the data in the way that journalists would, with the kind of questions they need to answer to do their story. So for example, in Gujarat, we wanted to look at what is the influence of NRI Patels in the United Kingdom on the Gujarat election. So we mapped that. We did a lot of mapping with journalists across the country to make our own data sets, if you like, to map certain areas of influence, geographies of influence with the electoral data. And that became the basis for our coverage. Now, in Karnataka, for example, we mapped things like Muslim dominant seats, Vocaligas, caste-based, agrarian crisis, the mining belt, and that would give us patterns. Now, the thing was, this was not just a simple data exercise. What we did was, when we had mapped about, say, 100 odd filters, we were very clear that we don't want to be didactic. We don't want to tell viewers this is the right way to map an election or watch an election. Maybe as journalists, we think 10 ways of looking at the election are really important, but your answer to those 10 might be very different from my answer. So essentially what we did was we designed everything for a mobile screen. What I'm showing you is a desktop view. It was designed for the mobile screen. And the idea was that the viewer becomes the expert. You don't need the expert in the middle. And we made all of these filters talk to each other. Say, for example, if I want to see where the agrarian crisis is, that's what you're seeing now. And how many of these are Muslim seats, you can see that. But the viewer can choose that. And then that way we could also map viewer engagement with it and what they were really interested in. So with the first time when we did it, we had about 100 filters. We realized in that election that people were really interested in about 50 of these. So then we shrunk it for the next election based on viewer demand and response. And by the time we led up to the 2019 election, we had it pat based on what our viewer demand, and that varied across regions. The thing I want to mention here is this product got productivized in 3 different versions. There was an analytical dashboard for the print newsroom, which drove our print coverage, and a lot of graphic-oriented data stories came out of that for the print editions. A second version of this was used for our television properties of across the group. And a third version was the one which was made for the mobile phone, which was for the public audiences. We also topped it up with database properties like, we had different work, like this is like a CEO view of that data. You can look at what's happening in urban seats, Dalit seats, Muslim seats, neo-urban seats, and so on. We had other properties, for example, you could track major political leaders. Narendra Modi versus Rahul Gandhi on your screen right now, what they were doing day by day. So on each day we were tracking their campaign and what they were saying in the campaign and how the discourse changed across geographically and subject wise. And what we did with all these properties was when we put them together, the result stunned us. We thought when we do these kind of knowledge-based products for a mass outlet like ours, this would have a niche result. However, the first time we tried it, we also put it at the center of our challenge was, how do we put it at the center of our editorial strategy and not make it just something nice to have which some cool people are doing on the side. So we put it at the center of the home screen on the day of our highest viewership on election day. And to our great surprise, we got the highest viewership in the history of our online platform on that day, with driven by these tools. And we tried it in 6 different assembly elections. In every single election, we had the same result, with the viewership numbers going up by 20-30% across engagement metrics as well as viewership numbers for every election. And in 2019, it culminated with the election day. So that was the result of these tools, and that really encouraged us, and it allowed us to test it and improve it as we went along, leading up to big election D-Day. The second tool that we built was, and let me just bring up some of. We also had a lot of granularity built into this. So, for example, if this is a view of Bangalore in the Karnataka elections, and you could essentially, I mean, larger voting patterns are different, but if you want to see in your building or in your locality where you live how people voted, that result may be very different from your constituency result or your larger state result. So you could essentially look at how Airport Road is voting, or say Banashankari in Bangalore is voting. So we really built a lot of granularity on scale, and we experimented with these kind of formats. And the result was a huge response from our readers, which of course had large monetization implications and so on. The second experiment we tried then was with budget coverage, and what we did a similar approach where we used a big data approach to create a similar data hub for election budgets and financial data of the Indian economy. But we were very clear that we are not an economics platform. We were a general audience thing, so we storified it by putting a political lens to it. So this, for example, shows you the political progression across BJP and Congress governments of different economic metrics, if you like, if a screen like this. So this is essentially how India has performed. But how does India earn its money? How does it spend its money across different metrics? And again, audiences, because in an atmosphere where you're working in an echo chamber of different interest groups on both sides, a database approach really worked. But here we brought in 2 new aspects of gamification and using interactivity in a much more deeper way. So, for example, this particular project was how we allowed users to test their knowledge of the Modi government's different economic metrics. So, for example, let's say how much wealth was created on the stock markets since Mr. Modi came into power. So you could draw your version of it. Again, this was enabled for the mobile screen, which was our first screen every time. And then the screen would tell you that whether your knowledge was good enough or not. So this kind of interactivity had this surprise. It had a real take up from our viewers. We also brought in another level of using big data to add another level of gaming. So if you are in the finance minister's seat and you want to play with the budget, and all of us can have opinions, what would you do, and what would that do to the economy? So this was a budget fantasy game where, say, if you want to spend 10% more on the budget, it tells you immediately how different political constituencies will react to that decision. You keep, and I'm just putting random numbers here, you keep, say, adding, as you scroll down, for healthcare, for subsidies, for scientific departments, and this gives you a summary that if you were the finance minister and you've taken these calls, what that would have done to government spending vis-a-vis what your budget would be. So these kind of elements added a lot of depth through our coverage. And Sanjay is here, so I'll say this with very carefully and with a lot of due respect, that we tried this for the first year in the budget, and we got a huge response. We almost got close to Economic Times, which is the gold standard of economic reporting. In year 2, we actually beat Economic Times on viewership metrics. And I say this with a lot of respect while Sanjay is here. And these tools, by the way, we optimize across languages. across more than half a dozen languages. And they were then put as widgets across platforms, including on the Economic Times platform and in other language platforms. And the third, and Chanpreet, I know I'm running out of time. The third element was bringing in automation of content. So this was all, playing with data and creating properties which were also monetizable, and giving and trying to get viewers to engage with us more deeply. By the way, our time spent on these properties was way out of the charts compared to our average time spent. So that allowed us, once we saw the initial success, it allowed us to double down on it. The third was, when you have these tools, a lot of 70 to 80% of journalistic work is often repetitive. It's predictable. It's the 20-30% which is really special, which only a real expert on the ground or a domain expert can deliver. So how do you optimize and using data to automate that? And that's happened in newsrooms in the West, in the UK, in the US. Bloomberg does a lot of that. So we, for example, for election coverage, we played, this is again, I'm showing the screen here. This is, for example, a beta version of what we played with in the Delhi elections of before the general elections of 2019. We essentially played with automating content live as the results come in, with the machine writing stories for us, which there were 70 constituencies in Delhi. Instead of putting 70 reporters on managing the data trends, can the machine write the basic story, and then your guys go out and do the real special cool stuff outside of that? We tested this across 3 elections. We didn't use it publicly, but when we were sure that it's working, then we tested it on scale, and it really worked. And this is the kind of, and then of course there was a lot more work that was done on it thereafter. I'll stop here, Chanpreet, and open it for discussion. But this was just to give you a flavor of the kind of tools that we played with.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Nalin. This is an eye-opener for everybody, I'm sure. Jeremy, can we put it back on the screen? And I'm going to let Jeremy ask the question, but I have one opening question to you, Nalin. While this is fantastic, and I know it took up a lot of time and effort from the editorial team and your focus as well, how would you say that you templatize this and then let the organization imbibe it and move it from being a one-off special project to becoming the way of doing business in the Times newsroom? It'd be great. And then, Jeremy, some of your thoughts on whether it resonates or not.
So I think it was a challenge because newsrooms typically in India are organized in very traditional formats, tech, product. The backend guys have often worked in silos, along with the editors, and the journalists in general haven't had a data approach. So in general, we had this thing where most top-class journalists would say their sense of a data person was, I'm writing this story, can you give me some graphic to add to it? Which is the worst way of working with data. So you have to put it in your drawing. You have to think visually, and you have to get it on your storyboard from the beginning. And you have to have your final output, where this will go, how it will show from the beginning, and you have to design it from scratch. So for example, the first challenge we faced was when you're doing big data sets like this, and I wanted to be in the center of my screen on the day when I'll have my maximum viewership activity. How quick is my loading time for that screen? And how much can I make visible? And if the screen takes more than a second to load, then it's all wasted. So we spent a lot of time with that. We basically put entire teams across disciplines together, and we handled the editorial part. And then it was also about, because a lot of people hadn't worked together in that way before. So that was a big challenge. The second was sensitizing the newsroom that this isn't just something that some techies do on the side. This is something which is at the heart of what we are doing. This is something which is the heart of the product that you're making. And this actually can drive your product your journalism much better, because this data hub is not just what is available to the viewer, which is why I said that we made a different analytics dashboard for our newsroom internally, that there's something like 70, 80 stories within 2 hours coming out of the insights of that data hub, which if you are working on the ground as a reporter, you might take a couple of days, at least a day, to figure that sense out by talking to your sources or by seeing when the data actually comes out. And here, the data is forming itself for you in stories. You just have to write around it and get a couple of quotes. So that mindset change took a lot of time. So we spent a lot of time in our regional newsrooms working with journalists on the ground to drive this, and it was a work in progress. And I think the challenge really is that how do you change mindsets, and that's always like turning an oil tanker around. So
thank you, Nalin. That's a very candid and effective process to follow. Jeremy, your views. How was your experience to drive this change at the Post?
I mean, I do think that Nalin and my own experiences at the Post are very similar, that the newsroom and the organization knew the value of technology, but that was an understanding at large. And so the question was, how could this technology actually impact in a positive way my job? And so as Nalin was able to do with the Data Hub, when you could say to a reporter, for example, using machine generated content to help tell the story of the election and to tell the story of the election in a way that was geographically specific, we're never going to ask, nor would we want to ask, a reporter to write a story that only appeals to a very small audience. So if the AI systems that we employ can offer insight about our subscribers or our audience, can create stories that appeal to very small audiences, but to millions of people in tiny small audiences, that removal of that rote and mundane work becomes very important. And yet you can still have this great relationship with your audience. And the really, really best thing about the experience for people at the Post is that the machine generated insights and content worked very naturally with the reporter content, because it was the unique reporter content that drove subscriptions, but it was the ability to be mass that started down that funnel, that was the top of the funnel, and that helped show the ads. And so there was this real connection between the journalism we wanted to do, the audiences that we wanted to attract, and the technology we wanted to use.
Great.
Can I just add one sentence comment to what Jeremy was saying? Jeremy is absolutely right, and the way this worked in our newsroom is very similar to how the Washington Post worked. So one example, using the insights from the Data Hub, we built an entire analytical video series. The data can tell you what's happening. It can't tell you why it's happening, or is that really the right picture or not. So we got a lot of our newsroom guys to then use this, put it on a screen, and talk it through and explain it. And I have a whole explainer series. You get this insight which you wouldn't normally get, or would take much longer to get, and then your experts really make sense of it. And that really worked for us.
Well, that's fantastic. I want to close this session with one question to both of you. Jeremy, you can focus on the West, and Nalin, I'd really like you to look at APAC. If you were a local news player or a regional news player who did not have the, the option of building something at large scale, or did not have that luxury of time, what would be your priorities as an EIC of a local regional player or a player with limited resources? What would be the top 2 technology investments or changes that you would put in?
Jeremy, you want to go with that first?
Sure. I agree that there is a luxury in being able to build your own technology. There's also a heavy cost that you have to go first, and that you don't get to benefit from other people's experience. And so I would say the really critical things, if you're not going to build your own technology, are twofold. How do you make more of what you already have? So for example, on the monetization front, if you're already showing your audience ads, how do you ensure that you're getting the most out of those ads? That you improve the viewability, so you show the same number of ads, but you realize a much higher monetization. How do you gain subscriber insights at a time that first-party data is ever more important, so you can raise the CPM on the ad impressions you already have? And then secondly, how can you invest in cutting-edge technologies produced by others that will help you leapfrog your competitors? So subscriptions are very important today. There are some ever more thoughtful tools around helping with the pricing model, helping to retain subscribers. But I'd also, for example, be thinking about micropayments, and how can I find other ways, when there's increasing subscription fatigue, at least among Western audiences, to find other ways to pay for the journalism that I want to create. And being the beneficiary of not having to invest heavily in building the technology yourself, you can sample what's the best of the third-party technology and whose experience has been the most successful using that technology.
Chanpreet, if I can add to that, I think Jeremy is absolutely right. I think the biggest challenge that my sense of looking at newsrooms around India, for example, is that everybody's looking for an answer and nobody has the right answer, and they're looking for straws everywhere and trying to see what sticks on the wall, right? So let me try and answer this in three ways. The first is the biggest issue with using tools like this, the kind of tools that Jeremy showed from the Washington Post, the stuff we were doing. There are always issues with CMSs. You can have the best ideas in the world, but if your CMS doesn't work or doesn't incorporate that, you're basically screwed. The now a lot of people invest in building their own CMSs. I think if you're a big publisher, it's probably better to get to see what others are doing and maybe customize it. So maybe instead of saying, I think we were talking before we got on air about build versus buy. I think buy and customize is probably a better way to go. Largely because a lot of people who build CMSs are often they make stuff that looks very good on paper and makes very good in PowerPoint presentations, but doesn't really work in the newsroom. Because the newsroom operation is and the guys in the newsroom are never the ones who make the calls to buy the CMSs. So I think buying and customizing and testing with the user is the way to go. The second is if you're a smaller publisher who can't afford a large one, there are many tools which can help you really optimize your newsroom functioning, which are available either free or at a very optimal cost. And so that's the second way to go. The third, I think, is there is a lot of fear in newsrooms right now with big data and automation in particular, that it'll make jobs go, and jobs are going anyway. So there's this big fear factor and this defensive mentality that even if it's good for us, we shouldn't do it because it'll drive us out of a job. And I think that's the wrong way of looking at it, because what data and automation and automation content is going to come. So it's not necessarily a cost-cutting measure. It's a cost optimization measure, that you use it to do the mechanical stuff. So if you've got a 10-member team and that 10-member team is doing stuff which you can get done for a very nominal cost, you can build on scale using big data and automation and get those 10 guys to do something really special. So you free them up from 80% of the crappy stuff they're doing, and get the machine to do that, and spend 100% of the time doing really quality stuff that only they can do. But that means killing of journalists, and that scares a lot of journalists.
Thank you, Nalin. Your passion and your experience speaks for itself. It's really, really insightful to get this straight from both of you. How did you collaborate? You were working with the editorial team. You were part of the editorial team. How did you collaborate with the rest of the organization and find this beautiful balance between between user experience and ad monetization? How did you come up with the whole development of this idea and the SaaS solution?
In truth, it was very easy at the start because the post was much, much smaller, and the threat of not transforming felt existential. So we couldn't imagine a world where we weren't forced to grow. And that meant growing editorially. It meant growing the size of our audience. And it meant that we would grow the revenue. Because even though Bezos had purchased the Post, and even though he was willing to invest to some degree, he was really looking for the Post to become self-sufficient.
Right.
And so his expectation was that we would find ways to work together holistically and focus on the customer first and foremost. And so what that meant was saying not just how can we have a better storytelling experience for our digital audience, but how can we have a better ad experience for our digital audience? And as we did that, what became a really virtuous cycle is that as the newsroom explored new technologies, the newsroom was able to then turn around and say to the advertising team, here's how we use these new technologies, and here's potentially ways you can use them with brands.
From our experience as well, with the kind of work that I'm doing more on the monetization side, and we'd like to move to the next session, we've realized that not more in our research and work in APAC, we've realized not more than 2 to 3% of the publishers have actually adopted the cutting edge technologies. And there is a lot of opportunity in moving publishers up the maturity curve, because the gap, or how do we say, the upside, can be really significant. So with that, I'd like to expand our discussion and bring in more focus on monetization and partnerships, and bring Sanjay and Hemant in. It's I just want to say it's not easy to lead some of the most respected brands, traditional media brands, into the digital era. And here we have Sanjay and Hemant who are doing that, leading by example. So thank you, Sanjay and Hemant, for patiently waiting and joining us for this session. I'd like to start with you, Sanjay. How effectively do you think the traditional media organizations have adapted to the digital first environment, and are they truly digital players now?
So I think you have to essentially look at the digital operations of a media company in multiple ways. If you talk about the publishing part, I think that everybody has evolved. So everybody started putting out their content, creating HTML websites in early days, then graduated to automating that process, and then finally kind of uh, deploying CMSs and adopting more and more technology to the content management, advertising kind of works. So I think content and advertising, the core of the business, was digitized to a large extent by most players, and without it, you can't really have a digital publishing company. But if you talk about other functions, analytics in terms of, or maybe finance or ad operations, I think that's still kind of little broken. I'll not say it's not digitized. It's digitized because you're using third-party services, but you're using multiple. You don't have consolidated view. You don't have analytics. So I think that's the part that probably needs to be fixed in the coming years.
Thank you, Sanjay. Hemant, my next question is to you. What are the key challenges that regional publishers are facing today, with reference to fragmentation of readers across social platforms, subscription and advertising revenues? Anything that you want to share in context of Lokmat as well would be really
Sure, sure, sure. So I fundamentally believe that there has been a paradigm shift in the way news content, especially, is being consumed today. So if I look at, say, 15, 20 years back, there was a lot more about destination viewing, and I would key in timesofindia.com or indianexpress.com, etc., and go to those sites for destination content consumption. But I believe there has been a complete shift into users now a lot more on third-party platforms, which could be Facebook and other social media platforms, to go and consume content. Messaging platforms are playing a very important role today, because I think so a lot of us have started to consume content basis recommendations by friends over WhatsApp and news feeds on Facebook, etc. So I believe we have to take a very serious note and acceptance of the existence of these third-party platforms in our life. And we also have to be very cognizant of the fact that, I'll just give you a small example. When I was running the India business for Hangama, we used to deal with multiple operators across the world, across multiple platforms, ranging from SMS, USD to voice portals to what used to be web portals at that point of time. And I always used to make this point that what content you create for a particular platform need not necessarily be an ideal, play out for the next platform. So a very basic difference was between SMS and USSD. So the same thing is what we are experiencing today. And you need to be and I would say here, different publishers would have completely different strategy out here. But my fundamental belief is that there is a huge opportunity out there. It completely depends on how you want to, reach out to your customer, in what form. The format of the content also plays a very important role. So today I have been able to drive a lot of my existing text customers, move them to video, and through video bring back a lot of customers back onto lokmat.com. So fundamentally, whether it is YouTube, Facebook, ShareChat, Telegram, each of them, I think so they have a very pivotal and important role to play. So while as a online news publisher, I would definitely be interested in getting more and more people to directly come onto lokmat.com, but at the same time, I also have to, recognize the fact that when you're talking about typically the new age audiences, which is, I would say, 18 to 24, 18 to 30, they are more prone to kind of discover content on third-party platforms than their own platforms. And it also kind of somewhere also redefines your entire content strategy and how you want to, adapt to those platforms and the needs of the consumers on those platforms.
Can I ask you a related question, Hemant? Related to this, how is your monetization strategy taking into account these fragmented audiences? Is there a way you are binding this together while editorial puts out this content? How do you actually build an ROI around it using any of the technology solutions or partners, third-party partners that you may be working with?
Yes, so there are a couple of interesting shifts, I would say again. So I think so today we are living in an era where we're talking about life beyond banners. And we are more moving into providing a more holistic solution to an advertiser. So every advertiser, marketer has very specific campaign objectives to meet. So while he advertises on Facebook and Google, and I think so this has been one of the largest, resonating statement we hear in most of the forums saying that, Facebook and Google walk away with 80% of the revenues. And I'm saying, why not? If those platforms have been able to deliver quality audiences, more targeted outcomes. So I think so that's where we are evolving ourselves. So there are 2-3 very important points here I would like to state. So, coming from outside, I believe a lot of news publishers today, invest in paid media to kind of score well in ComScore because that's a direct impact on the advertising. I would say focus on building good quality audience, focus on your organic channels for driving traffic, invest in content, and invest in building a brand rather than doing tactical stuff to get traffic online, because that has a direct impact on your scores when advertisers advertise with you in terms of responses to campaigns. The second important aspect, I would say more from a regional aspect, is please invest on the back of your advertisers to help them create campaigns in local languages, because in my initial days I used to kind of look at campaigns which were in English. The banners or the whole campaign communication was in English. You were reaching out to Marathi audiences. So now I've seen that while the banners have become Marathi, your landing pages for call to actions are still English. And I still believe that if you really want to go regional, that's a very fundamental shift which needs to be brought about. I mean, within the entire ecosystem, because that definitely completely, enhances the performance of the campaign. So that's another important point. When I spoke about solutions, I fundamentally believe if content is a core, so I was speaking the other time also, I said content, technology, distribution, and marketing are the 4 pillars in terms of building any successful digital ecosystem. So when we look at while I look at the news media business, when content is the core in terms of what a guy comes on your site to consume, it also, throws up a lot of interesting ways that you could, help a brand integrate his message along with the content story. So while native was one of the common aspects here where people said native advertising, though native in my view is no native at all, because it directly leads you to an advertising page. But there are ways in which you see the way video is evolving and there is a higher consumption of video. So how do we, kind of create content, involve the influencers, and create a more holistic brand solution for the advertiser, in my view, is going to be quite an interesting proposition.
Thank you. Thank you, Hemant. And Nalin, you.
Chanpreet, thanks, Hemant, for that. Chanpreet, I actually have a question for you, and this goes back to what Hemant was saying and also what Jeremy flagged earlier in his presentation when he talked about, the 2 partnerships, with one with Rolex and the other one. So, Chanpreet, you have been at the firing line of this in your role at Vice, in your role with the startup. So the question I'm asking is that, in my sense was, and I'm not, either journalist from the Newsroom side, my sense has been looking at Newsroom around India that, the monetization side really struggles because they're often force-fitting models from print and television into digital. And that doesn't work at all. And also then you have Google and Facebook on the table, and many and a lot of the publishing, the viewership is dependent for many publishers on that. So in terms of monetization technology solutions, if you could give us a sense of, is there hope at the end of the tunnel?
No, for sure there is. That's why we have Sanjay and Hemant right here along with us. So thank you. That's a really valid question. And Nalin, to be frank, the one truth in this entire thing is that we need to have a very consumer-oriented business, and there's a lot of tech that can go in to help us serve our consumers better. Jeremy made a reference to that by saying that we improved the product, got more out of what we had. With Zeus, they literally changed the correlation of better user experiences inversely proportion to the amount of monetization, and that's something we can learn from. The other most important thing that we've learned, which is very effectively with advice, with some of our clients, and something that Hemant was also mentioning: who's our audience, who's the advertiser, and how do we marry that? The ad tech stacks with their ability to match advertiser first party data and publishers first party data, and understanding the yield versus fill, and presenting your audiences in a multi-platform environment is the key. Technology will not sell itself. Sanjay and I kept talking about it a long time when we used to work together. Technology will not sell it. Yes, but technology can make your product better. You still need to find the core unique selling point of your audiences across the platform, engage with them, stand for something, and then use technology to deliver better results and ROI. I think the one thing that I would say for all publishers is that we need to find our unique selling point and educate the advertisers. And I think that's going to be a key challenge. That takes me back, thank you, but that takes me back to Sanjay. Sanjay, I've been wanting to ask two questions, and we really have somebody with your level of clarity in this. As the CEO of Indian Express, what are the top three problems that you are looking to solve today using technology, enterprise tech, SaaS solutions, and and then there's a follow-up question on build versus buy. How do you choose whom you are going with?
So I think the most important part, and I'll pick up from what Hemant said, that why Facebook and Google corner 80% of your revenue, of the revenue in the ad space today, because they know their audiences. I mean, unfortunately, I think this is the challenge that all media companies face, and they face not only in their digital avatars, but they have faced this even in their print avatars. They really don't know who their customers are. When you talk to your print colleagues and you ask them, okay, do you have a customer database? They have subscribers, but they don't have customer database. That relationship is owned by the vendor. So they will tell you, I can tell you data at a depot level, or the point of distribution, but beyond that, the last mile, they have absolutely no clue of who the customer is. And fortunately or unfortunately, unfortunately rather, I mean, there's nothing fortunate about it. Unfortunately, the digital avatars of all the publishers have carried on that tradition. So we cater to millions of people, all anonymous. We don't know anything about it. I mean, we know about a few people, maybe a few million out of the hundreds of millions that we reach out to, but that's about it. And I think that's the crux of the problem. And the reason being that, whether it was print or whether it is digital, we've always made money from advertising. So it was always about knowing who the advertisers are, where are they spending, what is their need, and catering to their needs. And the consumer actually became secondary in that bottle. I mean, it was a number. You wanted to have a reach, you wanted to have an audience, and that's where it was important. But it was never really important to know your customer. I think what has happened is in the last, I mean, you talked about 19 and 20 being different. And I think what has happened in that 1 year is suddenly everybody is realizing, hey, I need to look at the way we have been doing business, right? And there are other things which are accelerating. There are concerns about privacy. There are concerns, third-party cookies are going to go away. And suddenly the ad model that you were running also seems to be in jeopardy. And And you know that ad model alone is not going to take you to a sustainable roadmap for your business. So everybody is now saying, I need to build a subscription business. And when they start looking at a subscription business, they say, hey, it's just not about what kind of reach I have. The ComScore numbers don't matter at all. It's about what quality of engagement and reach do I have. So when you start digging your numbers and you realize, the quality engagement that we were looking for is actually very minuscule, right? You have a lot of people, 60%, 70% of your people who just come, give you one visit and go away. And they do a beautiful job of pushing you up on ComScore. But if you want to build a sustainable subscription model, that number is not really going to help you initially. And you really have to work hard to create regular engagement, constant engagement with those audiences. And that's an uphill task. So I think the biggest challenge, if you really ask me, for publishers today is trying to get to know their audiences. And after getting to know the audiences, how do I create engagement with them? And it's a win-win, because when you create engagement, not only are you opening the doors for a viable subscription model, but more engagement also means more page views, which means you are now able to sustain your ad model as well. So the two are not in conflict, the two support each other. And I think once you do that, the next important step is collecting first-party data. So, you relied on third-party cookies and networks and everybody else, but without having first-party data about your consumers. So the point is, if I have to sell a subscription to a customer, I need to know who he is. I need to know what he likes. I need to kind of build analytics around it. And I think the moment you build analytics up and you learn the art of selling to your consumer, not the advertiser, I think you will be able to do a good job of selling products for your advertisers to your consumers. So today it's a spray and pray, and that's why CTRs over at 0.2, 0.3, and we always have this challenge that publishers shy away from doing lead campaigns and performance campaigns because they are largely doing spray and pray. They don't have any information about the users, and they just hope that the banners end up on the right kind of customers and few of them click, and then the business kind of goes on. And that is what drives the ads low. That is what leads to ad wastage, if you really ask me, from everybody's perspective. That's what leads to higher ad densities on pages, because if you have to have a spray and pray model with low ad rates, what will you do? You will just keep increasing the number of ads. That leads to bad experience. Bad page load times starts impacting your user engagement. So I think it's a vicious cycle that we have all gotten into. And thanks to COVID, everybody is relooking at that model and saying, this model is a spiral which will just take you down, and you need to reverse it. And I think people have started to rework their strategies around this, because what you said in the beginning of the discussion, that we were in the comfort zone that the print is growing, even though it's growing at a slower pace, it's still growing, and the consensus view was it will continue to grow for the next 5-7 years at least. So we don't have to worry. We can use this time to just scale and not really worry about subscriptions. But I think what COVID did was certainly put a question mark on that assumption of the print growth for how long, and habits got broken. So we still haven't seen print subscriptions getting back to the pre-COVID levels. We don't know. COVID seems to be subsiding. What if there's a second flare up and a big second wave which kind of disrupts further? So I think there's a lot of uncertainty that has happened, and because of which suddenly I think the digital arms of print publishers have a lot more clarity on what they need to do right in order to succeed on their own without having the support of their print arms to subsidize them.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. So with that, Sanjay, I have one last question for the entire panel, and just want your quick views on that.
Can I just pick up on where Sanjay left for Know Your Customers? I have a very interesting point to make here. So what happened during COVID, we suddenly saw a huge shift, or I would say enhanced focus on digital. Because if today across Maharashtra and Goa, we have a daily readership of around 25.5 million daily readers on a monthly average, and at any given point of time in a day, it would be close to 7 million. Now, suddenly the big question was, how do I serve my customer? And that is when we realized that the true marriage between print and digital started to emerge. And through digital, we created programs using voice portals and OBD dialers to get guys to part with the first party data. And using that data, we started pushing out messages with links to digital saying the same news, the same hyperlocal news which you got through our 40 hellos covering 36 districts of Maharashtra is now available on lokmat.com. So that's the first time a guy came and sampled digital news content. And believe you me, the kind of jump we saw in our unique users and all the other metrics was phenomenal, mind-blowing. It was so encouraging because we always kept reading in KPMG reports and other Comscore reports that Marathi is the second largest language, Indic language after Hindi. And it truly came to life. The other reverse, I would say, we run a on-ground community program called Lokmat Sakhi Manch. So this year we enabled technology. We did not get guys to register, and women subscribe to this program across all the 36 districts of Maharashtra. We e-enabled the entire registration process. And today I've got 1 million records of women of Maharashtra who have opted in to receive newsletters and emails, etc. Now, you look at the magic this creates for brands who want to reach out to women. We did a very massive campaign for Coke for a property called Maza Modak, even during COVID, because traditionally they would take print advertising, and now with a little strain on the circulation of print, suddenly we realize that we have a much more holistic way to reach out to the audiences in a very targeted manner. So if you ask me personally, know your customer also brings back the focus on the consumer. And talking about investments in technology, I would say that's the place where everybody should really focus this year, because it not only helps you build an on-site experience, but it also, through an omni-channel platform, helps you market the customer to get them back to the site.
Well, thank you for sharing that experience and your initiatives in 2020. I'm going to wrap this up with one last question, and there are no rules to the answers. Okay, so Jeremy, will start with you, but this is for all. With the introduction of Core Web Vitals on one hand and sunset of cookie-based advertising, what would be your top priorities in the next 12 months? You can just name one or two. Jeremy?
You have to make your content ultra compelling. That in the end, with the sunsetting of cookies, you'll want signals from your audience. And to get those signals, you need people to come and consume content with regularity. If you can do that, we can find business models. As long as the content is compelling enough and unique enough, people will come, and there will be ways to subsidize the journalism you do. But if instead you concentrate on trying to make money as fast as you can in the most intrusive and aggressive ways, people won't come. And then it won't matter what you're doing. There won't be a way to subsidize the journalism.
Thank you. Sanjay?
Yeah, I think the basics remain the same. So basically, you need to kind of focus on the customer and the consumer, who's now becoming one. Earlier, they were different. And of course, you need to kind of make better experiences. Content is the king. I mean, somewhere, search and social kind of disrupted that thought process. But I think everybody is realizing that at the end of the day, content is the king, and you need to get that right. And I think technology has a much more important role to play. I remember, when internet came, the promise was you can target a market of one. I think today technology enables that targeting the market of one at that scale. We just need to ensure that which one to target, and that's where the data comes in. So I think that's what is important.
Thank you, Sanjay. Nalin?
Chanpreet, just to take forward what Jeremy and Sanjay was saying, in an Indian context, I think publishers need to take a very, very hard look at what they are publishing right now, and ask themselves, would they pay for this content? And the answer to that is that for 80% of that, they wouldn't pay for that content, because we've got used to, because of our legacy, because of our very strong print, because India has been an outlier. India and China originally were outliers in the print market globally when the global print market collapsed. China then also collapsed 4 or 5 years back, but India remained an outlier. A lot of our content is very digest type content. There are nuggets everywhere which are really unique. So to fine tune to add to what Jeremy was saying and what Sanjay was saying, you've got to really carve out niches for yourself and special stuff that only you have. And that means doubling down on content, but in a very tactical, strategic way. No, it just doesn't mean investing blindly. And then only looking at engagement levels, looking at building the subscription models, because the old model is broke and that's not going to come back.
Thank you. Thank you. Hemant, any last word on what would be your top priority?
So I would say twofold. One would be enhanced emphasis on the quality of content, credibility of content, because that's what we saw during COVID. Credibility was a big factor for users to come and consume content. And the second would be investment in technology to know my customers much better, because I think so that's long term, that's here to stay. Advertising, we are seeing it shifting from buying impressions to connecting with audiences. So that's going to be our focus this year.
Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen. This has been a fantastic session. Thank you for sharing your candid experiences. And I'm sure at the end of this, one thing is very clear, that content may be king, but the user is actually the one rejoicing right now, because finally it's time that we took notice that it's the person who matters. Right. So thank you so much. And I'm really looking forward to engaging more often. Thank you. And thank you, YuktaMedia and AdTech. Bye-bye. Good night.